The Quarterly, Job and Proverbs, Lesson 11, Proverbs 22:6, Train up a child. In properly interpreting Proverbs, it's important to remember their genre. They are proverbs, and not promises. It's true that some proverbs express universal truths, such as Proverbs 9:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. More commonly, however, proverbs express generalized truth, and it takes wisdom to know which proverb fits where, and where it would not be the right proverb to use. Using a proverb in the wrong setting can be dangerous, because its counsel will lead us in exactly the wrong direction. Saying, "a stitch in time saves nine," when you should say, "fools rush in where angels fear to tread," may lead to hasty action when wisdom would have counseled caution. Proverbs 22:6 is a classic example of a proverb that has often been called a promise in popular Christian books, sermons, and websites. The result of that misidentification has been confusion and heartache among many Christian parents who have been led astray by these usually well-meaning sources. To reiterate, biblical proverbs are always true, but they don't always fit. Taking them out of their proper context leads to misapplication, just as it does for any other biblical text. Part of the challenge with this proverb is a certain uncertainty about how exactly it should be translated. Is it about training a child or dedicating a child? Is he to be trained according to the way he should go, or dedicated at the outset of his way? There's more discussion of that in the Teacher's Guide. However, even if we accept the traditional translation, which most English versions broadly follow, there have been a number of different interpretations ascribed to the first half of the proverb. Some have understood training up a child according to his way as meaning that we need to train children according to their bent or their particular personality type. Now, this is undoubtedly good parenting advice, for no two children are the same. Some are stubborn and strong-willed, while others seem to melt at the slightest angry word, which itself may be a manipulative way of avoiding punishment. The wise parent undoubtedly studies their children to discern how best to direct their steps. However, this admonition is almost certainly not what the original proverb meant. The book of Proverbs is filled with references to a person's way as a metaphor for the direction of their life. In the previous verse, Proverbs 22:5, we are told, "Thorns and snares are in the way of the crooked." While in Proverbs 22:4 we learn, "The reward for humility and fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life." In other words, it matters profoundly which way you follow. Following the right way leads to honor and life. Following the wrong way leads to a path that is beset with thorns and snares. In context, therefore, Proverbs 22:6 is not a promise that a good parent who understands their child well and trains them in accordance with their particular nature will automatically see that young person turn out wonderfully. Rather, it's an encouragement to parents to take seriously their responsibilities towards the young to train them well, setting them on the right path from the very beginning of their way. Don't just leave your child to choose their own path in life. Direct their steps in the way that they should go. The second half of the proverb gives the reason why this parental action and guidance is so important. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Again, this is not a promise that the well-trained child will always turn out perfectly. Rather, it's an observation of a general truth, that lives have momentum in one direction or another. And as physics reminds us, momentum is generally conserved. A body in motion will tend to continue on that same path unless it's acted on by another force. And the reality is that whatever pathway our children start out on, for better or for worse, they will tend to continue down the same road. unless a greater force intervenes. This is as true of children whose parents neglect them as it is of those whose parents pour themselves into training their children. In fact, the reality is we are all training our children according to some way or other, either toward the way of the Lord or toward the crooked way. Since our children are not by nature self-actualizing little angels, but rather human beings in whose heart folly is inextricably bound, as Proverbs 22:15 reminds us, parental discipline and loving guidance is absolutely vital from our first moments onward. This wisdom may seem obvious until we start to consider the conventional worldview of those around us, including some Christians. Our society tells us anyone can raise your child for you. The daycare or a teenage babysitter can do as good a job as the child's mother and father. And it's perfectly fine to farm out the early training and discipline of your child to someone else, especially if both parents are then able to pursue fulfilling and financially rewarding careers. The initial verb train up is masculine, reminding us that disciplining and guiding young children is a father's work as well as a mother's. This proverb also encourages those who attempt to become weary in well-doing. As the father of 6 children myself, I can testify to the feeling that overwhelms every parent from time to time, especially when their children are around 2 years old. That all of their efforts are in vain, and that nothing will redirect the stubborn will of this little creature. Yet now that all my children are grown, I can testify to the proverb's truthfulness. I don't regret a moment of all of the hard work and effort that my wife, especially, and I put into training our children. It has borne good fruits in their lives. Not everyone has the same experience, however. The proverb doesn't guarantee that every child started off in the right way will automatically become a Christian and follow the right path through life, any more than the preceding proverb guarantees that every wicked person will find life difficult. In general, it is usually true that sin complicates life. It frequently leads to difficulties because this is a world designed by God for holiness and happiness to belong together. Yet through God's common grace, we do not all experience the full consequences of our sin. Likewise, as the proverb asserts, early training and discipline are incredibly important in shaping young lives. Many people have great cause to give thanks for the discipline, example, and instruction of godly parents. But there are also children who grow up in godly homes, with loving parents who discipline them as best they can, apparently just as well as other parents in the church, and yet those parents experience the tremendous heartache of seeing their children wandering away from the way upon which they were set. When they hear this proverb quoted, as if it were a promise that, provided they parent well enough, their children will inevitably walk in the faith, it's like a knife twisting in their gut, shaming them as failed parents, since God certainly cannot fail to fulfill his promises. But who would seriously want to claim this proverb as a promise? Are we not all deeply flawed parents who are mired in sin? At best, we pass on to our children a mixed message. Every time I disciplined faithfully and directed their steps well, there were others in which I grew too angry or let discipline slide because I was too tired or too lazy. If my children's salvation depended entirely on my ability to start them off right, then they were all doomed from the start. Fortunately, God's grace works in spite of our sin, calling to himself his elect, often following his pattern of working in families, and redeeming the flaws, small and great, that we learned from our parents and that we passed on to our children. Sometimes he's at work humbling us and our children as they stray, teaching us to fall upon our knees and to pray to him, to do what only he can, to give our children new hearts. Sometimes he will bring them back to himself after a period of wandering, through which they will learn about the depth of God's mercy in a way that they never could have, simply from reading about it in a book. And no matter on what crooked road we find ourselves today, whether it's a direction that was set for us by our family of origin, or through our own rebellious hearts, we don't have to stay on it. God's grace and the power of His Spirit can bring rebels safely home again, cleansed by Christ's blood, as Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 6, verses 9 to 11. Application questions. 1. Where have you seen the truth of this proverb acted out in your own experience? Whether in your own family or in the families of others, have you seen children who were strongly shaped by their early environment, whether for better or for worse? 2. Why is it important to see this verse as a proverb and not as a promise? 3. What does training up a young child actually look like? 4. How is the gospel good news for parents, old and young, and for children alike?